We found it on a Tuesday in early June. I want to be precise about that because the date matters in a way I did not understand until later. Tuesday the 4th of June. The winter solstice was 2 weeks out. The days were at their shortest, and the highland was doing what the Tasmanian highland does in the deep of winter, which is close in around you in a way that feels personal. The light goes by 4 in the afternoon, and what replaces it is not just dark. It is a specific quality of dark that this part of the world produces and that I have not encountered anywhere else in 20 years of working remote country. We found it, and finding it did not help anyone who had already gone missing. I want to be clear about that too. 14 hikers over 6 years. 14 people who walked into the Tasmanian Central Highland on marked trails with adequate equipment and did not walk back out. Finding what was responsible did not bring any of them back. What it did was change the nature of the job going forward in ways I am still working out how to describe. My name is Alan Marsh. I am 57 years old. I have been a parks ranger with the Tasmanian Parks and Wildlife Service for 20 years, the last 9 of them stationed in the Central Highland District, which covers a section of the state's interior that most Tasmanians have never visited, and a significant portion of them do not know exists in any specific way. It is on the maps as wilderness area. It has marked trails. It has huts at regular intervals for overnight walkers. It looks, on paper and on the ground in daylight, like managed wilderness of the kind you find in a dozen places across the country. It is not like those places. It took me 3 years of working it to understand that, and 6 more to understand why. The 14 missing hikers were not all from the same area of the highland. That was the first thing that made the investigation difficult. They disappeared across a range of trail systems covering about 200 square kilometers of terrain. No single location, no single trail, no single set of conditions that connected them geographically. What connected them was the season. All 14 disappeared between late April and late July. The shoulder of winter and the deep of it. The period when the days are shortest and the highland is at its most closed in and the trails are quiet enough that a person can walk for a full day without seeing another human being. The investigation ran for 6 years through the standard missing persons framework. Police, SCS, volunteer search and rescue, aerial search, ground search, dog teams. We found gear on 4 occasions: a tent fly, a set of trekking poles, a day pack with its contents intact and organized as if it had been packed carefully by someone preparing to leave rather than abandoned in a hurry. A single boot, laced and tied, sitting upright in the center of a trail as if someone had placed it there deliberately and walked away without it. We found no remains. Not one of the 14, nothing that would let us close a file in the standard way. I am going to tell you about the Tuesday in June. I was in the field with 2 other rangers, a woman named Sarah Doyle who had been in the district for 4 years, and a man named Pete Croft who had transferred from the northwest coast the previous spring. We were doing a trail condition assessment on a section of the Central Plateau route that runs between 2 of the highland huts, a 12-kilometer stretch through open moorland, and then into a section of pencil pine and pandani that grows in a gully below the plateau edge. The assessment was routine. We had done it before on the same stretch. We were in the pencil pine section, about 8 kilometers from the southern hut, when Sarah stopped walking. She did not say anything. She just stopped and stood on the trail with her head slightly tilted, the posture of someone listening for something specific. Pete and I stopped behind her. The pencil pine section is dense enough that your sight lines are short and the sound environment is enclosed. Wind in the canopy, the occasional movement of a currawong in the upper branches, water somewhere below us in the gully, running over rock, normal sound for that terrain. What Sarah had heard and what Pete and I heard when we stopped and the sound of our own movement through the scrub cleared was silence. Not the silence of a forest going quiet because a predator has moved through it, a deeper silence than that. A silence that did not seem to originate from the absence of sound, but from the presence of something that was displacing sound the way a physical object displaces air. I have worked this highland for 9 years. I know what normal silence sounds like up here. This was not normal silence. Sarah said quietly, "It is here." She did not explain what she meant. She did not need to, because Pete and I both understood what she meant with the same certainty that you understand when someone on a boat says it is going to turn, and you can feel in your legs that they are right. We stood on that trail for about 2 minutes. The silence held. Then Sarah took 3 steps off the trail to the left, into the pencil pine scrub, and crouched down and pointed at the ground. The ground in the pencil pine section is a layer of accumulated organic matter over the underlying dolerite. Decades of fallen needles and moss and the debris of the trees composting down into a dark spongy substrate that holds the shape of anything that presses into it. What Sarah was pointing at was a depression in that substrate, roughly circular, about 1.5 meters in diameter. The edges of it were clean and consistent, not the ragged edge of an animal depression or the irregular shape of a fallen branch impression. Clean and consistent and about 4 centimeters deep across the full diameter. There was a second depression 2 meters further into the scrub, same dimensions, same clean edges, then a third 2 meters further again. They ran in a line heading northwest into the scrub, each one identical to the last, spaced at exactly 2-meter intervals as far as we could follow them into the pencil pines before the vegetation closed in too tightly to continue without cutting. We photographed everything, we measured everything, we marked the location with GPS. We did not follow the depression line into the scrub. I want to explain that decision because it was not a cautious decision in the normal sense. It was not that the scrub was too dense or the terrain too difficult. I have pushed through worse. Pete is the most physically capable ranger I have worked with, and Sarah has more hours in tight scrub than anyone in our district. We could have followed the line. We chose not to, and the choice was unanimous and instantaneous, and none of us felt the need to discuss it. The depressions led somewhere that all three of us understood without saying out loud that we should not go. That understanding was not fear exactly. It was the same understanding you have when you are reading a slope, and you know without being able to articulate every factor that the slope is going to move. A professional assessment made below the level of conscious reasoning. We went back to the southern hut and I called the district manager, a man named Vickers who runs the Highland operation from an office in Queenstown. I described what we had found. He was quiet for longer than the description warranted. Then he asked me 2 questions. He asked whether we had followed the depressions into the scrub. I said no. He said good. He asked whether the depressions were present on the trail's surface itself or only off trail. I said only off trail. He said good again and told me to submit a full written report and to flag the location in the trail management system as a restricted monitoring area and to continue normal patrol operations. I asked him if he knew what the depressions were. He said he would call me back. He called me back 4 days later. The call lasted 11 minutes. What he told me in those 11 minutes I am going to tell you now because it is the information that changed the nature of this job and because I think the rangers who work this highland after me deserve to have it before they need it rather than after. The depressions have been recorded in the Tasmanian Parks Archive since the 1970s. There are 47 documented occurrences across the Highland District going back to the earliest systematic survey of the area. The archive entries describe them in the same terms we used. Circular, consistent edges, 1.5 meters diameter, 2-meter spacing, appearing in lines that run in a consistent directional bearing that changes from occurrence to occurrence but is consistent within any single line. The archive entries span 50 years and the depressions have not changed in any measurable characteristic across that period. Same dimensions, same spacing, same clean edges. Vickers told me that the current working theory, developed over several years by a small group within the service who had been tracking the occurrences, was that the depressions were resting points, not tracks, not the impressions of something moving, the impressions of something stopping. Something that moved through the highland at intervals and rested at 2-meter spacings for reasons that the working group had not been able to determine. The line of depressions we found ran for at least 40 meters into the scrub before we stopped following it, which meant at minimum 20 resting points in a single line, which meant whatever made them had stopped 20 times in that stretch of pencil pine before moving on. I asked Vickers what the working group believed was making the depressions. He said the group had not reached consensus on that question and that the honest answer was that the archive contained no direct observation of the event. No ranger in 50 years of recorded occurrences had been present when the depressions were made. They were always found after the fact, always in terrain where visibility was limited, always in the shoulder and depth of winter. I asked him about the 14 missing hikers. He was quiet again for a moment. Then he said that the spatial analysis of the missing persons cases showed a correlation between the locations of documented depression occurrences and the last known positions of 11 of the 14 missing hikers. Not all 14, 11. The correlation was not perfect. It was strong enough that the working group had included it in their internal reporting. He said the working group believed the correlation was meaningful, but that meaningful was not the same as explanatory, and that without a direct observation of the event that produced the depressions, they could not draw a causal conclusion. 11 of 14. I have thought about those 3 words every day since that phone call. 3 of the 14 missing hikers disappeared in areas with no documented depression occurrences. 11 disappeared in areas where the depressions had been recorded within the previous 12 months, meaningful but not explanatory. That is the language of people who know more than they are saying and are being careful about how much of it they put in writing. Vickers told me one more thing before he ended the call. He said the working group had developed a set of field guidelines for rangers working in the highland during the winter season. He said the guidelines were based on the patterns in the archive and on observations made by rangers who had been in the field when the depressions were fresh, meaning made within a period of hours before the ranger arrived. He said those rangers had noted consistent environmental conditions accompanying fresh depressions, the specific silence we had experienced in the Pencil Pine section. A drop in ambient temperature that was measurable but not attributable to weather. A quality of light in the immediate area that several rangers had described independently as reduced without any change in cloud cover or time of day. He emailed me the guidelines that afternoon. There are 9 of them. I am going to tell you what they say. Do not follow a depression line into terrain with limited visibility. If you encounter a line of depressions, mark the location, photograph the depressions, and withdraw to the nearest open ground before calling it in. The withdrawal should be made at steady pace. Do not run. Do not increase your pace significantly. Move as you normally move through the terrain. If you encounter the specific silence, stop walking immediately. Do not speak. Do not use your radio. Wait for the silence to pass. The silence has a duration that varies between 2 minutes and approximately 20 minutes based on archive records of ranger accounts. When the silence passes, the ambient sound returns gradually over a period of about 30 seconds. When sound has fully returned, you may move and speak normally. Do not attempt to move or speak during the silence. Do not make camp within 200 meters of a documented depression occurrence site. The archive contains the GPS coordinates of all 47 documented sites. These coordinates are loaded into the field GPS units issued by the district office. When selecting a camp location, the GPS unit will flag proximity to a documented site. Select an alternative location. If you are alone in the field and you encounter fresh depressions, meaning depressions with clean edges and no debris accumulation in the base, do not continue your planned route. Return to the nearest hut or trailhead by the most direct route that does not require passing through the area where the depressions were found. Radio the district office when you reach safety. Do not use artificial light to illuminate a depression directly. Photograph depressions using ambient light where possible. If artificial light is required, illuminate the area adjacent to the depression rather than the depression itself. If you find a depression that is warm to the touch, which 2 rangers have reported in archive accounts, do not touch it again. Back away from the depression to a distance of at least 30 meters. Radio the district office immediately. Do not wait for your next scheduled check-in. Radio immediately. Between the hours of 4 in the afternoon and 8 in the morning during the months of May, June, and July, do not leave a highland hut alone. Paired movement only during these hours in this season. If your partner is incapacitated and you must move alone, carry the personal locator beacon on your person rather than in your pack and activate it before you leave the hut so that your position is being tracked in real time. If you encounter a hiker on the trail who appears disoriented or who cannot account for a period of time, do not allow them to continue their planned route. Escort them to the nearest hut and call for extraction. Do not leave them alone while awaiting extraction. Stay with them regardless of how long extraction takes. If at any point in the field you feel that the terrain around you has become aware of your presence in a way that the terrain is not normally aware of a person moving through it, trust that feeling. It is not imagination. It has been reported by enough experienced rangers in enough separate incidents that the working group treats it as a reliable environmental indicator. Trust it and act on it by moving to open ground. 9 guidelines. I have read them so many times in the 4 months since Vickers sent them that I could recite them in any order. I follow all 9 of them on every shift in the winter season. So do Sarah and Pete. So does every ranger in the Highland District now, because Vickers briefed the full team in July, and the guidelines are now part of our standard operating procedures for the May through July period. We have not had a missing hiker since June the 4th. That is 4 months, the longest gap in the 6-year series. I do not know if the guidelines are responsible for that gap, or if the gap is coincidence, or if whatever makes the depressions in the Pencil Pine has simply been quiet this season. I do not know enough to distinguish between those possibilities. What I know is that the Highland in winter is different from the Highland in any other season in a way that 50 years of archive records confirms, and that 9 rangers over those 50 years reported the feeling of terrain becoming aware of their presence, and that 11 of the 14 people who went missing in this district went missing within 12 months of a documented depression occurring. See, in the same area, I know that on Tuesday the 4th of June Sarah Doyle stopped on a trail and heard something that was not normal silence, and that all 3 of us understood without discussion that we should not follow those depressions into the scrub. I know that understanding probably kept us out of the archive in a different capacity than the one we currently occupy. Steve Arlott, whose name appears in the missing persons files from 2 seasons ago, was an experienced outdoorsman who had hunted and walked this highland many times. His guide, Dennis Calder, has spoken publicly about what happened on that hunt and about what he believes is in the highland. I have read Calder's account. What he describes is consistent with what the archive describes and what the working group has been trying to understand for the better part of a decade. It rests, it moves, it leaves impressions in the ground that are always the same size and always the same spacing and always in the same season. It has been doing this for at least 50 years and possibly much longer. The early settlers had a name for something in this highland, and the name was about behavior rather than appearance, and the behavior was watching. What it does beyond watching is what the archive cannot fully account for. What it does beyond watching is 11 people in 6 years. We follow the guidelines. We move in pairs after 4 in the afternoon. We do not illuminate the depressions directly. We trust the feeling when the terrain becomes aware of us and we move to open ground. We have not lost anyone in 4 months. That is what we have. 4 months and 9 guidelines, and the knowledge that somewhere in the pencil pine below the central plateau, there is a line of depressions running 40 meters into the scrub with 20 resting points and a bearing that heads northwest into terrain we have not been into and are not going into. Not until we understand what rested there. Not until we know what the resting becomes when it is finished.